I often catch myself thinking about how different my life could have been if my parents hadn't divorced when I was 7. Back then, I was just Lucinda Thompson, an ordinary child living with her mom and dad in a cozy house they had bought together. I remember those early years being filled with simple joys, family dinners, weekend trips to the park, and bedtime stories read by both parents. I believed it would always be that way. But everything changed when they separated. Dad moved out but left us the house and made sure we could stay there. He paid enough child support so that Mom didn't have to work, and she seemed content with that. She started spending more time at home, and there was this strange, almost suffocating silence. A year later, Steve entered our lives. At first, he seemed nice enough, bringing me candy, telling funny stories, and smiling as though he genuinely wanted me to like him. Mom radiated happiness around him, and I tried to be polite, even though I missed my dad. Everything changed after their wedding. My stepsister Cindy was born, and the house gradually stopped feeling like my safe haven. Steve started giving me these odd looks, full of irritation, as if my very presence bothered him. Sometimes he said things that seemed harmless at the time. "Don't you miss your dad?" Or, "Don't you think you'd be better off living with him?" But now I understand there was much more behind those words than idle curiosity. I was 12 when I overheard a conversation that turned my world upside down. I had gone to get a glass of water but froze when I heard Steve speaking to Mom in a low, firm voice. "I got a promotion. My salary's almost doubled. You won't need to work anymore, and we won't need Lucinda's child support." I held my breath, hiding around the corner. Mom replied, "But that money helps. It covers a lot." Steve sighed and said, "Sarah, we both know Lucinda would be better off with her dad. Plus, wouldn't it be nice to just focus on our family, on Cindy?" The way Mom didn't hesitate before agreeing shocked me. She said so casually, "You're right. I'll call Mark tomorrow about taking Lucinda." I stood there in the dark, my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The glass of water I had come for was forgotten. Those words echoed in my mind. My own mother was ready to send me to live with my dad just because she no longer needed his money. It was as if I was something disposable, something to be cast aside when I became inconvenient. The next day, Mom told me the good news. She acted as though she were doing me a favor. "You're going to move in with your dad. You'll have more opportunities there," she said, as if this wasn't her way of getting rid of me. I wanted to scream, to ask how she could do this, but instead, I stayed silent. My heart was breaking, but I was afraid that if I said anything, they'd send me away even faster. Dad welcomed me with open arms. He didn't ask too many questions or try to explain why things had turned out the way they did. Instead, he set up a room for me in his apartment, painted the walls my favorite color, and filled the bookshelf with the book series I loved. On that first night at his place, he sat on the edge of my bed and said, "I'm sorry it happened like this, kiddo, but I want you to know you'll always have a home with me." Those words became an anchor that kept me steady in the years that followed. Mom practically vanished from my life. She rarely called and almost never visited. Only on holidays did she pretend to remember me. Dad, on the other hand, was always there. He attended my school plays, sat through parent-teacher conferences, and comforted me when my heart was broken for the first time. He helped me get into a good private school, encouraged my interests, and never made me feel like a burden. When it came time to apply for college, he stayed up late with me, reviewing essays and helping me choose a university. He never said it outright, but I knew he worked hard to make sure I never felt abandoned. I still remember the day I got my acceptance letter to Princeton. I was sitting in my room in Dad's apartment, lazily flipping through a magazine, when I saw the thick envelope with the university's logo on it lying by the door. My heart skipped a beat. I carefully opened it, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter my dream. When I read the first line, "Congratulations, you've been admitted," my legs gave out, and I collapsed into a chair, gasping for air. Dad heard my shout of joy and ran in from the kitchen, where he'd been cooking dinner. I handed him the letter, unable to speak. He read it carefully, and his eyes filled with tears. "You did it, kiddo," he said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I always knew you would." College was expensive, but Dad never complained. Every time I brought up the cost, he'd wave me off. "Your education is my priority." He worked late nights and took on extra projects, but always found time to support me. Those 4 years flew by in an instant. I studied hard, always remembering how much effort Dad put into my future. And when graduation day arrived, he was in the front row, beaming with pride as though he were the one earning the degree with honors. After college, I landed a job at one of the city's top consulting firms. It was demanding but incredibly rewarding, and I quickly settled into the rhythm of it. I rented a nice apartment downtown, just a few blocks from Dad's place. We had dinner together every Sunday, just like we did when I was a kid. He'd ask about my work, curious about my projects. Sometimes we'd just sit on his couch, watching old movies and eating pizza, just like we used to in high school. Those moments reminded me that, no matter how hectic life got, the time I spent with Dad was an unchanging island of warmth and comfort. Everything was going fine until the diagnosis came. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctor spoke cautiously, with a strained smile, but I heard only one word: 6 months. My father remained calm, comforting me, even though he was the one who needed comfort. He only lived for 4 months. I was 28 when I lost him. The final weeks of his life were the hardest I've ever experienced. I took time off work to be with him in the hospital. We talked a lot, reminisced, laughed, and even cried a little. One night, when his strength was nearly gone, he squeezed my hand and said, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Lucinda. Never forget that." I repeated those words to myself over and over after his death, like a mantra. After the funeral, I found out he had left me everything: his apartment and $700,000 in savings. I was in shock. I couldn't even think about the money. I just missed him so desperately. I spent hours in his apartment, surrounded by his belongings, trying to figure out how to go on. A month after the funeral, my phone rang. I almost dropped it when I saw the caller ID, Mom. Her voice was uncertain, almost unfamiliar. "Lucinda," she began, "I heard about your father." "I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say. We had barely spoken over the years. "Thank you," I managed to reply before she continued. "I know this might not be the best time, but Steve passed away. He had a heart attack." She paused, waiting for my reaction, but I said nothing. Then she added, "I've been thinking a lot about you. Maybe it's the grief making me vulnerable, or maybe I've just realized how much I've missed you." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to hang up, but another part, tired of loneliness and loss, agreed to meet her for coffee. One coffee turned into regular meetups. I got to know Cindy properly for the first time since she was a child. She was 21 and struggling to find her footing in life, bouncing between job interviews. Mom was working as a cashier at a supermarket, a far cry from the days when she lived a carefree life without a job. I started visiting them a few times a month. We talked about many things: my travels, weekend getaways, vacations in Europe. I always brought them gifts. For Cindy, it was designer clothes. For Mom, fine perfumes or elegant trinkets. It felt good to share my success with them, though it became a strange routine. I couldn't show up empty-handed. Even if I was just stopping by for coffee, I felt guilty if I didn't bring anything. The local mall became a regular stop before any visit to Mom and Cindy. Each trip there became a sort of ritual. I'd spend hours browsing, looking for things that might make them happy. I loved seeing their joy, especially Cindy's. She adored the clothes I brought from Europe. Her eyes would light up every time I pulled something out of my suitcase. "Oh my God, Jess, is this really from that boutique in Paris?" she'd squeal, spinning around with a designer dress or sweater in her hands. I enjoyed watching her delight, the way she'd twirl in front of the mirror, trying on her new treasures. Mom, though more reserved, never hid her gratitude, nodding appreciatively and carefully folding each gift. I often caught myself wondering if I was trying to buy their affection, trying to fill a void I'd carried since childhood. The things I never had back then, I now happily gave to them. I chose everything with care, a cashmere sweater for Mom, a leather handbag for Cindy. But one day, I decided to ask them directly what they truly wanted. Mom, as always, looked at me with a faint smile, holding her coffee cup. "Oh, I couldn't possibly," she began, lowering her gaze. "Maybe just a few new towels from Target?" Cindy hesitated too. "Well, maybe some drugstore makeup." I felt relieved, thinking their wishes remained modest, but something changed after that conversation. The requests started getting bigger. At first, it was slightly more expensive gifts, but then they began to grow. "Hi, sweetheart," Mom texted, "when you're in the lawn next month, could you pick up that Gucci bag we saw online?" Cindy added her own requests. "I need new winter clothes. Prada would be nice." Over time, the requests expanded to cover not just luxuries, but essentials. "We're running low on groceries," one of Mom's messages read, leaving me unsettled. I stared at my phone, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The lists were getting longer, more demanding. They weren't just about things that might make them happy anymore. Now they expected me to cover their basic needs. One day, after receiving yet another list, I decided I couldn't let it go on. I drove to their house, determined to talk. Walking into the house, I immediately felt the tension. "Mom, Cindy, we need to talk about these requests," I began, sitting down at the kitchen table. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "What do you mean, honey?" she asked, avoiding my gaze. "These lists. These constant requests. It's getting out of hand," I said, trying to stay calm, though my voice wavered. Cindy rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. You can afford it," she said, crossing her arms. "That's not the point," I replied, struggling to keep my tone even. "Yes, I have money, but—" "But what?" she interrupted. "Are you going to hoard it while your family struggles to get by? You live in a fancy apartment, you're always traveling, and you can't help your poor family? You're selfish." I felt my face flush with heat. Her words cut too deep. "Selfish?" I repeated quietly. "Selfish that the money came from the parent who actually wanted me? Who didn't sell me off when I became inconvenient?" The room filled with a heavy silence. Mom lowered her head as though the words hit exactly where they were meant to. "It's my money," I continued, standing up. "And I'll decide how to spend it." Cindy jumped up and shouted after me, "Very nice, Jess. Very nice. Great way to treat your family." I grabbed my bag and slammed the door before they could say anything else. For an entire month, my phone was silent. No calls, no messages, no lists. Part of me felt hurt. But another part felt a strange relief, as though a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally started to lift. A month after that argument, my phone rang. "Mom" flashed on the screen. I froze before answering. "Lucinda, sweetheart, could you come over? I need to talk to you about something important," she said. There was something in her voice that unsettled me. Despite our recent fight, I couldn't ignore her request. I drove to her house, trying to calm my thoughts, but anxious possibilities swirled in my mind. When I arrived, Mom was already sitting at the kitchen table. Her face looked tired, her expression tense. Cindy was pacing around the room, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something much more serious. The atmosphere immediately told me this was going to be a difficult conversation. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting down across from Mom. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, and I noticed her lips trembling slightly. "I went to the doctor, Lucinda," she began. "It's my knee. They say I need urgent surgery. A total replacement." My stomach twisted uneasily. Suddenly, it was hard to breathe. "How serious is it?" I exhaled. Mom lowered her eyes, her voice shaking even more. "The doctor said if I don't do it soon, I could become disabled. I won't be able to work anymore." Her words instantly pulled me back to those final months of my father's life. Memories of his suffering, the hospital corridors, the machines keeping him alive came rushing back like a tidal wave. Back then, I had felt powerless. But now I could do something. "The thing is," Mom continued, "the best specialist for this kind of surgery is in Arizona. They have an opening, but—" She stopped, glancing quickly at Cindy, who turned away to stare out the window. "All the treatment, the surgery, the hospital stay, the rehabilitation," Mom's voice trailed off, as though she were gathering her courage. "It's going to cost $70,000. I froze. The number hit me like a brick. 70,000? I repeated, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. "I know it's a lot," Mom said quickly. "But Cindy will come with me to help during recovery. The entire process will take about a month." Her words echoed in my mind. Hospital corridors, beeping machines, it all came alive again in my memory. I couldn't let that happen again. If I could help, I had to. "I can give you half now, $35,000, I said after a long pause. "And the rest once I get the hospital bill." Mom's face darkened, as though her expectations had just crumbled in front of her. "But I need the full amount," she insisted. "The hospital requires upfront payment." "Mom," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's all I can do right now. I have to be practical." She opened her mouth to argue, but Cindy placed a hand on her shoulder. They exchanged a glance I couldn't quite interpret. Mom swallowed hard and finally nodded. "Okay, let me call the hospital," she said, getting up from the table. "Maybe I can arrange to pay in 2 installments." She left the room with her phone in hand. I heard her voice in the hallway and felt a small wave of relief. A few minutes later, Mom returned. "They agreed," she announced. "We can pay half now and the other half after the surgery." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. I transferred the first $35,000 to her account and helped them pack. On the day of their departure, I drove them to the airport. We exchanged brief goodbyes, and I watched them disappear into the crowd, feeling a strange sense of emptiness. A few days after they left, I was sitting in my home office, going through work documents. My phone rang, and I smiled when I saw the name Rachel Martinez, my best friend from elementary school. We hadn't seen each other in years but had recently reconnected through coffee dates and nostalgic conversations about how far we'd come from our childhood dreams. "Hey, Rach. How's it going?" I answered. There was something off in her voice, and it immediately put me on edge. "Jess," she began, "I need to ask you something strange. Do you know that your mom and sister are in Europe?" I laughed, thinking it must be a joke. "No, of course not. They're in Arizona. Mom's having knee surgery." "Yeah, I thought so too," Rachel hesitated, but... Her voice trailed off, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. My head spun with anger as I stared at the photos Rachel had sent me. Mom looked perfectly healthy, smiling in front of the Trevi fountain, a glass of red wine in her hand. Cindy was taking selfies in front of designer store windows in Rome, posing like she was in a fashion magazine. In other photos, my Aunt Angela and her daughter Emma lounged by the pool of a luxurious villa. Each photo, every timestamp, cut into me like a blade. Dates from just yesterday, clear proof they were in Europe. All of it screamed that the money I had transferred for Mom's treatment had turned into part of their extravagant vacation. I sat at my desk, trying to process how they could have done this. How could Mom, knowing how painful losing my dad had been for me, use that to manipulate me and take my money? "There's more," Rachel added hesitantly. Her voice was tense, as if she wasn't sure she should continue. "My sister said Cindy was bragging about it on social media. Apparently, your mom bought everyone one-way tickets. They rented a villa for a month, and they'd been shopping at boutiques and eating at fancy restaurants." I nodded, though Rachel couldn't see me. My face felt numb, and the words barely registered. A deep sense of betrayal grew inside me, so intense it made it hard to breathe. "Thanks for telling me," I managed to say. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up. That night, I didn't sleep. I scrolled through the photos over and over again. Mom's face, glowing with joy. Cindy, proudly showing off another purchase. I couldn't tear my eyes away from those images, like a masochist intentionally inflicting pain on themselves. How could they? To lie so brazenly, so confidently. They had exploited my memories of Dad's suffering, my fears, and my desire to help, all to get access to my money. The next morning, with a heavy heart, I dialed Mom's number. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. She picked up after the second ring, her voice cheerful as if nothing had happened. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you?" she asked, as if this were just another casual conversation. "How did the surgery go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, it went wonderfully," Mom exclaimed. "The doctor said it was perfect. I'm already starting rehabilitation." A wave of fury surged through me. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to keep myself under control. "That's great," I said, my voice laced with barely concealed anger. "I'd love to speak with your doctor about the procedure. Can you put him on the phone?" There was a tense pause. I could imagine Mom scrambling for an excuse. "Oh, he's very busy right now, sweetheart," she finally said. "Besides, there's no need to bother him. Listen, I have to go. They're calling me for physical therapy." Her words were cut off by the sharp click of the call ending. I sat there, phone in hand, staring into space. Memories flooded my mind, Mom giving me up as a child when Dad's money was no longer necessary. Mom reaching out only after Dad's death, when his inheritance came to me. Mom sending shopping lists for years, expecting me to cover her expenses. And now, this ultimate betrayal. I made a decision. If she wanted to play this game, I'd play along. I began calling her every day, asking how her rehabilitation was going. Every time, she had a new excuse. "The doctor is in surgery right now, sweetheart. He's at a conference today. He's with other patients. He's off duty until tomorrow." With every new excuse, it felt like I was watching a poorly directed play where the actors forgot their lines and improvised to cover up mistakes. I didn't know how far they were willing to go, but one thing was clear: they hadn't anticipated that I'd start asking questions. I started keeping a list of Mom's excuses. It became a sort of grim game for me, though it left a bitter taste. I couldn't believe how ridiculous the excuses grew with each call. Sometimes, it felt like she was making them up on the spot, throwing out lines without even trying to justify them. One day, I decided to change my approach. "Mom," I said, making my voice sound concerned, "why don't we have a video call? I just want to see you, to know how you're doing. To make sure you're comfortable in the hospital." There was a faint rustling on the other end of the line. I imagined her covering the receiver with her hand, consulting Cindy about what to say next. "Oh, sweetheart," she finally replied, her voice trembling slightly, "I look just awful. All swollen, covered in bruises. You wouldn't want to see me like this. And the hospital Wi-Fi is terrible, it keeps cutting out." Her words left me with a strange mix of disappointment and mild irritation. Yet, I pressed on. "Really?" I asked, trying to sound trusting. "That's odd for a leading medical facility." In the background, I could distinctly hear the tune of Italian pop music. It was a faint detail, but it struck me instantly. No hospital performing complex surgeries would have music like that playing. "Oh, you know how it is," Mom brushed it off casually. "Oh, listen, I have to go. It's time for physical therapy." Her words ended with a sharp click, leaving me staring at the phone screen. In that moment, I felt anger boiling inside me. They were lying to me, playing games, thinking I wouldn't notice the glaring inconsistencies. The next time, I tried a different approach. "Mom," I said with slight insistence, "just send me the hospital bill directly. I'll transfer the remaining $35,000 straight to them." She froze for a fraction of a second, and that pause stretched into eternity. "No," her voice came too quickly, almost sharply. Then she softened her tone. "I mean, that's not necessary. Just transfer the money to me, and I'll handle everything with the hospital. They know me here now." I went quiet, feeling something break inside me. After that conversation, I decided to stop calling. Let them sweat it out. Let them feel that I wasn't falling for their manipulation anymore. A week later, my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I watched as it rang, imagining her growing panic. When I didn't answer, a text followed. "Lucinda, the hospital is demanding immediate payment. They're threatening to send the bill to collections. We need the money urgently." I didn't rush to reply. Let them wait. Hours later, I finally sent a short response. "No problem. Just forward me the bill from the hospital, and I'll take care of it right away." Silence followed. For 3 days, no calls, no messages. I imagined them scrambling, trying to figure out what to do next. Finally, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Urgent. Hospital bill." I opened the attachment and nearly laughed out loud. The bill was outright ridiculous. A blurry template, clearly copied from some old document. The date was from 6 months ago, and the hospital address was in California, not Arizona. But the most glaring detail? The payments section listed Mom's personal bank account. I stared at the pathetic document, feeling a strange combination of amusement and bitterness. They hadn't even tried to make it look real. It was such a flimsy attempt at deceit that I found myself laughing while simultaneously feeling sad for anyone who might fall victim to such schemes. In response, I photographed a stack of $100 bills I had laid out on my desk that day. I fanned them out to make them look especially impressive, then attached the image to my reply. "I received your bill," I wrote. "Here's the money I'm sending." My finger hovered over the send button for a moment. Taking a deep breath, I pressed it, feeling something inside me go still. "Play along, Mom," I thought. "Let's see what story you come up with next." Less than an hour after I sent the photo, my phone rang. Mom's name lit up the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to prepare for the conversation, but even that didn't help. "Lucinda," her voice was shrill, panic evident in every word. "What is going on? Where's the rest of the money? We were expecting it." I squinted slightly at her demand. It sounded as though she believed she was entitled to the money, as if I owed her. But my resolve had already solidified. "Cut it out, Mom," I interrupted coldly. "I know exactly where you are. And it's not at a hospital." A second of silence. I could almost hear her frantically trying to think of a response. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "You're in Italy," I replied, pausing to let the weight of my words sink in. "You're at a villa, shopping in designer stores, and dining in expensive restaurants with Cindy, Aunt Angela, and Emma." Another pause, longer this time. I pictured her biting her lip, scrambling for words to explain herself. Her breathing sounded heavier, and I could feel her weighing how far I might go. "How did you find out?" she finally asked, her voice cautious. "Cindy sent photos to Rachel's sister, who showed them to Rachel, and Rachel sent them to me," I replied dryly. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" "The villa, the shopping sprees, it's all there." My voice trembled as I continued. "You used my father's death. You used my grief and guilt for not being able to save him to con me out of money for your vacation." Mom fell silent again. This time, the pause felt endless. Then her tone changed. The fake concern she had worked so hard to project vanished, replaced by a sharp, almost aggressive edge. "Yes, we're in Italy," she blurted out defensively. "I knew you'd never give us money for a vacation. But why shouldn't we travel too? You're always going somewhere, Paris, London, New York. Meanwhile, Cindy and I can barely afford groceries. It's not fair." I felt a wave of fury course through me. The words spilled out of my mouth faster than I could think them. "Unfair?" My voice cracked with emotion. Unfair was hearing, at 12 years old, my own mother deciding to sell me off because she didn't need Dad's money anymore. Unfair is you showing up 16 years later, not because you miss me, but because Dad died and left me money. Mom didn't respond. I heard her inhale sharply, as if preparing to argue, but instead, she quickly changed the subject. "We can talk about all this later," she said, clearly trying to dodge my anger. "Right now, we have a serious problem. We don't have money for tickets home, and we still need to pay for the villa. Everyone needs to get back to work, and we can't afford to lose our jobs. Please, Lucinda, we need that $35,000. That moment was a turning point for me. Suddenly, everything became crystal clear. Nothing had changed. She was still the same woman who had discarded me when I became inconvenient. Only now, it wasn't me she needed, it was my money. "That's your problem, Mom, not mine," I said firmly. "Goodbye." I pressed the end call button and immediately blocked her number. For the rest of the day, I combed through my social media, messaging apps, and any other way they might contact me, blocking everyone: Mom, Cindy, Aunt Angela, anyone involved in their scheme. Sitting in the silence of my apartment, the apartment my father had left me, I felt something inside me break. The last, fragile hope that my mother might truly care about me was gone. All that was left was emptiness. 2 weeks passed after I cut all ties. One day, my phone rang, and my grandmother's name appeared on the screen. I nearly didn't answer, but Grandma had always been different. More honest. More real. "Lucinda, sweetheart," her voice was anxious. "Your mom called me. She said she desperately needs $115,000. I don't have that kind of money, but I thought maybe you." I closed my eyes, trying to stifle a sigh. "Grandma," I said gently, "let me explain what's really going on." I told her everything. About the fake surgery. The vacation in Italy. How they had used every opportunity to bleed me dry. The more I spoke, the heavier her breathing became. "Oh, Lucinda," she finally whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never thought Sarah would do something like this." "Don't worry about them, Grandma," I assured her. "They got themselves into this mess. They'll have to find their way out of it." But as it turned out, I wouldn't have to wait long to see how they'd handle it. Rachel called me a few days later. "Have you seen what Cindy's doing on social media?" she asked. No, I replied, frowning in confusion. I've blocked them everywhere. Well, Rachel paused, as if deciding how to phrase it. She's running a fundraiser. She claims her rich sister abandoned them in Italy without money to get home. I nearly dropped the phone in shock, but her next words, full of indignation, quickly pulled me back. She's painting you as some heartless rich woman who left her poor family stranded in a foreign country. I froze, feeling a familiar wave of anger rise in my chest, but this time, it was accompanied by something unexpected, a strange sense of amusement. How do they do it? I asked, unable to hold back a short laugh. Well, Rachel drawled, sounding equal parts irritated and amused. They spent almost 2 weeks trying to raise money. Apparently, they've even started selling all the designer clothes and bags they bought. Really? I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. And what about the villa? Oh, the villa's owner threatened to call the police because they couldn't pay for the rental, Rachel replied. And this one got me. They almost lost their jobs because they stayed on vacation way longer than they were allowed. I shook my head, trying to process this tragicomic mess. Their grand adventure had truly turned into a spectacular failure. A month later, Grandma called again. Her voice was worried, but there was also a tone of resignation, as if she knew her news wouldn't surprise me. Lucinda, they're finally back, she said. But it's a complete mess. What happened? I asked, though deep down I already knew what I was about to hear. Your Aunt Angela isn't speaking to your mother anymore, she began, and I could hear the mix of weariness and disappointment in her voice. Sarah demanded that Angela help pay for the trip when everything fell apart. And apparently, they argued so much that Angela flat out refused. Anne. Grandma sighed heavily. Sarah is blaming me now, saying I chose you over her. I closed my eyes, feeling both bitterness and relief at the same time. I'm sorry they dragged you into this, Grandma, I said. But please, don't be too kind to them. Sometimes people need to face the consequences of their actions. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. Strangely, I felt at peace. I walked to the window of my apartment, the one my father had left me, and gazed out at the sunset. The city was slowly bathed in the soft glow of the evening light. Shades of orange and pink filled the sky, bringing with them a quiet sense of joy. On my desk was a stack of travel brochures. I was planning my next trip. This time, it was Greece, a country I had always dreamed of visiting. The old me might have felt guilty about traveling while Mom and Cindy were struggling to make ends meet. The old me might have even invited them along, hoping to build the relationship I'd spent my whole life longing for. But that version of Lucinda no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone stronger, someone wiser. I had finally learned that some relationships simply aren't worth preserving. Sometimes, you just have to let them go. My father's last words, spoken in the hospital, echoed in my memory. You were the best thing in my life, Lucinda. Never forget that. I hadn't forgotten. And now, I finally understood how lucky I had been. I had one parent who truly loved me, who put me first. He had taught me to value myself. Mom and Cindy could continue their schemes, their victim playing. They could look for their next mark, but it no longer concerned me. Now, my life was peaceful. I traveled when I wanted. I worked hard, spent time with friends who appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could give them. Occasionally, Grandma would update me about Mom and Cindy. They were still struggling. Still searching for their next convenient source of money. Still playing the victim. But it no longer affected me. I sat at my desk, preparing to book my tickets to Greece. My heart felt light. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly living for myself, not for someone else's expectations or manipulations.